Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Fantasy NBA Tonight. My name's Steve, and I'm joined tonight by Marcus and Lawrence,
Hey, what's
which
up,
you can see on
everyone?
the screen. So tonight we're going to be. Last week we started by doing a top 7 all-time franchise teams, and we did the Suns, the Bulls, and the Bucks last week. So tonight we're going to get started. We're going to dive into the Philadelphia 76ers, the Detroit Pistons, and the Golden State Warriors. So how do you guys enjoy working on your teams? Lawrence, I know you had the Sixers. Any like overall themes of what you enjoyed doing the most? What was the most tedious about this? Just your overall thoughts.
I think the thing I enjoyed the most is just kind of rehashing some of the history of the team, because even me picking Philly, there was no rhyme or reason why I picked that team. It was just more so I just took a team that I felt had some tradition, and that was the first team came to my head, and I was like, I'll do Philly. I think some of the most tedious part about it was just kind of diving into the numbers and seeing how these guys impacted their teams. I mean, because we can speak about it in a general sense, but to dive in and see exactly, how many accolades they accumulated over their times throughout their tenure for the particular teams, I think that was something that maybe took a little more time than I anticipated. It didn't take a long time. It was just more so just making sure you were, buttoned up with everything that you were going to speak about. So that was the biggest thing. But I mean, I'm a fan of basketball. I'm a fan of the game, the historic aspect of the game. So yeah, it was good to do that. And I got a chance to YouTube a couple of these guys because I haven't seen much of them. I know they've been on some old video games I've had, but other than that, I haven't seen too much of a couple of guys on my list. So I had to go back and kind of catch some highlights and see how they played.
Yeah.
What about yourself, Marcus? I know you chose the Pistons. Do you have any reason why?
Man, Michigan native, man. I grew up a huge Pistons fan. Always will be, of course. But I mean, like, not just loving the Pistons, but like we grew up in a household where we were like Pistons fanatics. Like, I remember back in the day watching those like Pistons Nets playoff games, and I think it was like Chauncey hit a half-court shot to send it into overtime, and we still lost. And I watched some of those losses ruin my mom's whole day. You know what I mean? like we were huge Pistons fans, and we had this cool thing called Detroit Pistons training camp. And it was like a bundle. You went to the camp, and it was like a standard basketball training camp. And I met Rick Mahorn one time, and we went when they won the championship, and we got to take a picture with the trophies. And like every time you went, you got to like take a shot on the court. Like I've just always loved the Pistons, obviously being a Michigan native. But I think the hardest thing with looking at it is separating the bias of players that are really good, but ones you grew up on, because obviously I witnessed the 2004 championship and just that run, for those 5 years where they were such a dominant team. And versus guys, you know of because they're legends, Pistons legends. And you just didn't grow up on them. You don't know too much about them. So similar to Lauren, it was a similar thing to like look at guys and it's like you really had to dig into the numbers. It would be like they wouldn't have been my first pick, but now that I check the stats and see the impact they had on their team and the game, you got to consider them. So, but it was definitely getting over that bias of my favorite home team. But once you said Pistons, I couldn't resist. I had to take the opportunity. So,
Yeah. So I'm in a similar boat as you. I decided to choose my Warriors.
Sure, I noticed that.
Yeah, born and raised in the Bay Area.
Cool,
had some tough times growing up, and now I got spoiled recently. Last 5-10 years, been pretty incredible run they had. I would agree with you, Lawrence. The most difficult part was just writing the stats, writing the accolades. Also, like for me, I was nervous about my 7th man. That was the hardest choice for me. I assume the same for you guys. The starting 5 wasn't as difficult, but once you got to the bench guys, there's just a lot of people that, am I building a team based on pure basketball talent? Am I basing it off of a little bit of chemistry, like how the how the pieces fit together, that kind of stuff was a challenge, especially when you got to your the bench for me.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, especially with the bench. I mean, my last guy was like, do I go preference or do I go accomplishment?
Yeah, and that's hard.
And so it was like I was debating and kind of just leaned towards a guy who was really accomplished. I just felt like he deserved a nod for, what he contributed to the team, because it would have been easy for me to like, without giving the spoiler for who it was going to originally be Maurice Cheeks, but I pivoted away from him for someone else. So I'll save it for
him. So he's not even in the top 5.
No, he's not in my top 5.
Okay.
Great player, but I mean, this list is full of great players. I mean, it's hard to put down you can only get 7, so somebody has to be on the outside looking in.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's a great segue. Let's get started with your Philadelphia 76ers tonight.
Okay. So first and foremost, the guy I got, he was the least tenured guy in Philly, but nonetheless, he was probably as impactful as they come in the 3 years that he was there, and that's Wilt Chamberlain, who is probably on your list, but we'll save that for when we get to you. As you know, he played for the San Francisco Warriors prior to making it over to Philly. But in his 3 years in Philly, he was MVP all 3 years. He was Finals MVP, and he won a championship in '67. While also averaging 27 points, 24 rebounds, and 7 assists. So it was hard to leave him off of the list. Those numbers are crazy. That type of run in any time is crazy, because it's hard enough to get one MVP, but to land on a team and immediately become the most dominant player in the league, which he was at the time, but he just shifted over to the East Coast and kept it going. And also was able to bring a championship as well. So I had to put him on my list. Although he wasn't there long, he still was extremely impactful for the franchise.
When I was looking up Wilt Chamberlain, because we might have an overlap there on our teams, do you know who he beat in the '67 NBA Finals?
Was it the Celtics?
No, it was I thought I had it written down.
It was the Warriors.
Yeah, the
Warriors.
Oh, no kidding.
And then 2 seasons later, they lost in the championship to Will.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I knew I wrote it down somewhere. Also, another note, he's a Philly native, which I didn't know before doing the research. I didn't know he was actually from Philly, so it's kind of fitting that he had at least a little bit of time to play in his hometown, which is cool for any player that plays professional basketball to be able to play for home, even if it's just 1 year. Another guy on my list who was extremely popular, Charles Barkley. Couldn't leave him off.
Yeah,
put him on there. He's as versatile as they come for a big guy. I mean, I guess it's arguable to call him a big guy, but when we talk about guys who can take it off the backboard, go coast to coast, he's one of those guys that was doing it way earlier than we got into this pace and space time frame of basketball, where it's extremely valuable to have a power forward that can run, pass, and dribble and kind of facilitate. But while he was there, he averaged 23 points per game and 11 rebounds. He went to 6 straight All-Star games. He was an all NBA first team 3 of those 6 years. And so he was extremely accomplished while he was in Philly. And he wasn't even the main option. I mean, they had a few other guys that were on the team with him prior to him getting there that were there, and then he kind of had to work his way up, and it was still arguable when he left if he was even the best player there. But nonetheless, couldn't leave him off my list. Had to have Charles Barkley, a Philly staple. I think he was, if it's not Dr. J, I think most people think of him or Allen Iverson if you're thinking about, Philly legends. So Charles Barkley was the second guy on my list.
Now, he played on Philly before he went to the Suns, right? Or
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah, he did. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, he was drafted by Philly, played for Philly, started his career at Philly. So so that's where he kind of got going before he made a couple other pit stops.
Mm-hmm. And he would fit really well alongside Wilt, I feel like, on the basketball court.
Yes. I mean, it'd be interesting to see. I mean, there's only so many rebounds to go around. I don't know I don't know if Charles Barkley is known as the tenacious rebounder he was if he ended up playing with Chamberlain, because I mean he's 7'2" and he's grabbing everything off the backboard. I mean, I don't know where Charles gets his rebounds from, so he might just end up being a bigger scorer if that was the case.
All right.
Third on my list was Dr. J. Dr. J is my dad's favorite player, so he probably loved to hear that I had him on my list. But you can't not have Dr. J. He's probably the greatest 76er ever. I mean, if you talk to anybody 45 and up, that's probably their choice. Extremely iconic, wore the fro. He went to 11 All-Star games in 11 years. That's something I didn't know. So he was literally an All-Star every single year. Won the MVP in 1981. Averaged 26 points, 8 rebounds, and 4 assists his time there. And he ended up winning a championship in 83 against the Lakers. And that's also, I knew they beat the Lakers. I didn't know it was that. I thought it was a little later, but it makes sense that it was around that time. And so had him on my list. Was also All-NBA first team while he was there. Over half the time he was playing for Philly, and completely came from the ABA and dominated as soon as he got into the NBA. Nothing changed as he transitioned from the ABA. And he was the third guy on my list who's, if we're building a starting 5, he's probably playing the shooting guard as opposed to small forward on this team. If you guys got anything to say about it, I'll stop there for a second.
Well, one thing, I was just looking up what the 83 Lakers roster was at the time. I mean, that was a loaded Lakers lineup. They had Magic and Kareem and Kurt Rambis and James Worthy and Bob McAdoo. That was a hell of a team that they beat. So I mean, goes without saying why he made the team there.
Yeah, well deserved if you can beat that team at any point. So another guy that I have on my list, famously known for the soundbite "Fo Fo Fo," Moses Malone. And so that was his prediction to start the playoffs. He didn't think that they'd lose to anybody, and they came close. They only lost to the Bucks. They lost one game to the Bucks. They went 12-1 on that playoff run, won the championship, and was extremely accomplished while he was there. He was all defensive first team in 83, the year they won it. He was the MVP in 83. Which would probably make sense, being that they beat the Lakers, to have somebody of his caliber on the team. The entire time he was there, he averaged 24 points, 13 rebounds, and that was in 4 years. And he made 4 All-Star games as well. So then he was traded to I had who he got traded to, Houston, for some scraps, but one of those guys that was in the deal was Clifford Robinson. Another fact that I didn't know. Thought Clifford Robinson was a lifelong Portland Trailblazer. So the fact that he was traded for a guy like that, but at the time Moses Malone was the MVP, and for the MVP to be traded at a time like that is just unheard of. But apparently he was having issues with the front office. He wanted more money at a time where money wasn't that big, but I mean, clearly when a guy of his stature to demand more pay based on what he was doing, rightly deserved. He should have been paid. So they knew that wasn't going to be the case. They got him out of there. In comes Clifford Robinson, and they still had a few more good years, but definitely lost a huge player. Fourth on my list is Allen Iverson. Now, he's my personal favorite. He's probably the best player that Philly's had to me. The entire time he was there, just iconic. A guy who was undersized, considered an underdog, but was probably the most prolific scorer that I've seen under 6 feet. No one could stop him. Averaged 31 points a game, 2 steals per game. went to the finals in 2001, which was also his MVP year. Won MVP, was Rookie of the Year, 7-time All-Star. 7-time All-NBA, 6-time All-Star. I mean, the list goes on for his accolades for Philly, and was a big part of what they did. And the most impressive thing about his run is for a guy to be his size to not really have another All-Star caliber teammate. They tried with Jerry Stackhouse, they tried with Larry Hughes, didn't really work out. So they just put together a band of high quality role players that just fit their role. And they were able to go to the finals in 2001. I mean, Eric Snow was the point guard. They had Derek McKee, Aaron Lynch, and Dikembe Mutombo. A lot of guys. I mean, I guess you could say he's an all-star, but he's definitely not a scorer. He was more of a defensive anchor, sort of how we spoke about Rudy Gobert last week. And so for him to be that small in stature and to be the go-to guy and everyone knows it every night, and for him to still go out and play at such a high level was extremely impressive. So I had to put him on my list. He deserves a statue in Philly. That should be coming at any point. I don't know how they don't do it. And his jersey is in the rafters, much like the rest of the guys that are on this list. Everyone that's on my list has a retired jersey for the 76ers. If you guys have anything you guys want to add to that, feel free.
That's a special list, man. That's all I got to say. That's an elite list. I mean, I know we're talking all the time, but like you said, you kind of forget about the overlap of some players who are actually on the team and then also just the impact they had. So that's awesome, man.
So my two bench players, first guy was Hal Greer. Hal Greer was probably the second best guard to play in Philly based on the numbers. I tried to YouTube him a little bit as well. Looked to be extremely athletic, or at least very fast, and score with the best of them. Actually, the year that they won the championship, he played on that team with Wilt Chamberlain. And that year they kind of flip-flopped scoring. So he averaged 27 points per game and Wilt averaged 24 a game through that playoff run. So that just shows the potency of his ability to score, and also how much of a big piece he was to that team, which I didn't know, much of his impact prior to me looking him up. I knew of his name. I've seen him a little bit, but hadn't done the research that I did prior to our list that we made to see how much of an impact he made. Was also, as a career guy, was 19, 5, and 4. So he was steady. 19 points per game in that era is huge. That's probably like 25 points a game now when you consider the pace that the game was going at that point. 19 points per game is really high in the 60s and 70s for a guy who's a guard, especially when the game was big man dominated. Some of it, he's a Hall of Famer, number retired, like I said, and had a real, and was just a big piece of that playoff run. And he was a 7-time All-Star, and 7-time second-team All-NBA. I was trying to find out who was first-team All-NBA who kept him off the list that many years, because for him to be second-team that many times means someone kept keeping him off the list. And so I couldn't figure out who it was. And I was just like, I'm gonna just make a note that he was second team. So I'm still gonna have to figure that out because that's been bugging me. Last guy on my list is Billy Cunningham. Billy Cunningham was a 4-time All-Star. He was on that 67 championship team. So they were the big three, so to speak: Cunningham, Hal Greer, and Wilt Chamberlain. Averaged 21 and 10 for his entire career in Philly, played 9 years. So it was almost a double-double guy. And he played 2 seasons in the ABA. So he played in the ABA prior to coming over to the NBA. And number 32 is retired in the rafters as well. So for him to be an All-Star almost half the time he was there, I don't know how he missed a few more All-Star teams. I mean, he was on the All-Rookie first team. And to average 21 and 10 for your entire career those are great numbers for anybody. And so I went with him over Maurice Cheek. So that was my pick for the last spot on my bench. He plays small forward, so I figured he'd give me some versatility. Hal Greer plays point guard, so they both come off the bench. and can play multiple positions, so to speak. So instead of taking a guy who probably plays just one position, I took a guy who can kind of do multiple things. So that rounds out my my 76ers that I chose on my all-time Lawrence's Philly team.
Man, I don't know if it gets any more thorough than that. Yeah, that was solid. That was
So yeah, that's a really solid team. I think they could compete with the likes of any team in the NBA today. Mm-hmm. One interesting note that I found doing this is that the old time players seemed like no matter if you were Wilt Chamberlain or Moses Malone or whoever you were, you could get traded for scraps like really easily. It seemed like that happened so often in the earlier days of the NBA.
Yeah. I couldn't believe when I saw Clifford Robinson. I was like, really, Clifford?
I mean, Wilt Chamberlain was traded to the Sixers for I don't even know who the names.
I mean, like what type of proper compensation could you really get for Wilt Chamberlain? I mean,
right.
I don't know what that could be, especially when you see what guys are getting traded for these days. Another guy that he got traded for his name was Jeff Rulin. Never heard of him. Don't know who he is. If anybody that knows him or is related to him that's watching, I apologize. But definitely didn't know who he was. But those are the two guys that got traded for Moses Malone. They maybe could have won a couple more championships if he stayed. So,
I got a question.
Yeah.
Who do you think on that team would be the alpha?
Who do on that team do I think what?
Would be like the alpha, would be the leader, would be like, the face of the team.
Ooh, it would probably I think it would be Iverson. I just think he has the most flair of all these guys. In the locker room, like as the locker room leader guy, I think it would probably be Wilt Chamberlain. I just think he commands so much respect, like his presence and what he brings to the game, and them probably knowing him prior to coming over to Philly, knowing what he's done. I just think he would have so much respect that that's probably the guy that they would lean towards, when times get rough or for motivation or for whatever the case is, the guy that keeps the locker room together. But the face of the team would be Allen Iverson because he's just so exciting to watch. I think he just brings a flair to the game that's rare. And it's easily relatable because he's such a small guy doing what he's doing that it looks a lot more amazing than, a 6'7" Dr. J or, Wilt Chamberlain being 7'2" and doing what he's doing, even though it looks crazy. But he's a giant out there. I mean, you don't see many 7'2" guys walking around. So I just think his relatability would be what puts him over the top for Philly fans and people around the league that would be watching him at that time.
Yeah. Definitely makes sense. I like the team.
Thanks. It took me a second, but yeah, I felt like my starting five, they all could play. So I had Allen Iverson at the 1. I got Dr. J at the 2, even though he plays small forward, because I had to crunch all these guys into the lineup. And then I got in the front court Wilt and Barkley, and then Moses Malone at the 3. I just feel like he's versatile enough to, I think at this point, I mean, it'll kind of be positionless basketball if we're building these teams like we want them to be. And he doesn't have to necessarily fit a role because he could shoot as well. So it wasn't like he was a guy who only played in the paint. He could shoot the ball. He could run the floor. He could finish. Same thing with Dr. J. And we'd be bruising everybody because we're just a big team. So figured that'd be the way to go. Let Allen Iverson probably get his assist up a little more than scoring because he finally will be playing with people who can just run. That's one thing about this team. My starting five is extremely athletic. So I'd put my money on them versus other all-time teams.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Okay, that's solid.
Yeah.
All right. So, of course, I had the Pistons. This list, similar to Lawrence's, like the best of the best. But it also has that, fan favorite, like any home Pistons fan and, NBA fans just can relate to some of the players chosen. And it was hard, like you said, because there's what ifs. You really got to look back to see some of the guys and their impact they had, in the era, we didn't even watch. So, To kind of kick things off, the first guy, I mean, I like, similar to kind of like you said, AI to play the same position. I like to think he could be somewhat considered the best Piston. He played with a flair and, he played around 6 feet. And that is, of course, to no surprise, Isaiah Thomas. And I mean, he was just such a dominant player. And obviously, if you've been tuning into the documentaries and stuff, Isaiah Thomas gets a bad rap and the bad boys. But I mean, all that aside, you have to put respect on how dominant of a player he was. He played around 6 feet and he was just, that gifted all around. He was a 12-time NBA All-Star, 2-time NBA All-Star Game MVP, 3-time All-NBA first team, and 2-time All-NBA second team. And of course, you know about the championships when the bad boys went back to back. And that was battling against Michael Jordan and those guys. And while, it was a dirtier game, they demanded respect. And, you don't win by just dirty calls and foul plays. I think he was like the floor general on a team that had a lot of good guys with like Rick Mahorn, Bill Laimbeer, Joe Dumars, Dennis Rodman even, And I think the way that he facilitated all of that and just made his impact known, it was just, it was incredible to see. Similar to you, Lawrence, like you don't really know how good somebody is until you just pull up like a YouTube video and go back and just watch, and you actually see him out there. And Isaiah Thomas, wow, he was just like another dominant player of that era. You can't think of the Larry Birds, Magic Johnsons, Michael Jordan without thinking about an Isaiah Thomas, and then, he played, a long career, almost 1,000 games, averaged 19.2 points. But the eye-popping thing is, even with almost scoring 20 points a game, his career average is 9.2 assists. So, he was definitely out there diamond, just running the offense. And I just feel like at that time, the Pistons, because some of these guys I'll bring up later on, they played on the Pistons at a time where they weren't that great. If you really think about the run they had in the mid-'80s and when they won in 04 in that stretch, that's probably the peak of how good they've ever been, So to play at a time where, like, your impact, is felt and, you kind of benefit from it. They won back-to-back championships, and anytime they were in the East, they were a force to be reckoned with. That just made it that much special, So at a time where the team was arguably the best, he was the face of the franchise. So that's why I had to go with Isaiah Thomas on that one. And secondly, I'm kind of just going in order here, but if I have to go looking at I don't know if you want to call it the second best player, but I got to go here with Joe Dumars, and I'm putting him at the 2 guard. And believe me, this was hard because I grew up on the Chauncey Billups and Rip Hamiltons of the world. You know what I mean? Like, those guys were just incredible. But once again, Joe Dumars, he's just a part of a legendary squad, and he was a great player. And I didn't even know this, but as I look back and looked at some of the accolades, he was honestly such a two-way player. He was all NBA defensive team for 3 years, 1990, 92, and 93. So, for being a 2 guard, that shows his two-way ability and, how his presence wasn't just felt, scoring. He was actually a linchpin on defense. And when you think about Laimbeer, Rodman, and Rick Mahorn, and then have someone at the guard position who's an elite defender, that just kind of puts into perspective, the success they had as a team. And he also was on the NBA All-Rookie team, and he was an MVP in 1989, which I actually didn't know. So, that just shows with Isaiah Thomas getting MVP awards, then winning championships. Once again, even in an era where Michael Jordan was at his peak, Joe Dumars was still, very successful around that time. So bringing in some of the actual stats, career stats that I managed to pull up, his career average in points was 16 points, 4.5 assists, shot 46% from the field, 84% free throw shooter. And, he almost averaged about a steal a game, just about every single season while he was in his prime. So, once again, you got Isaiah Thomas diamond 19-9. You got him, a great defender scoring about 16 points a game. I just feel like with that backcourt, it's like the best, the Pistons ever had. And they had such good chemistry. And I feel like while Joe Dumars, especially winning an MVP, And especially as we see in today's game, right? You see like the CJ McCollums and the Damian Lillards or other, backcourts and the success they have. And it's harder for another guy to kind of get out of the way and let the main player be the best without feeling like they overshadow them or they can't live up to their own potential. We see that a lot, and that can result in problems and different things. But to watch how well those guys played together at that time, that was a special thing to see. So Joe Dumars, that's who I'm going at my 2 guard. And this next one, it could be a little controversial because it is kind of an asterisk next to it. But, I mean, once you hear it, it won't be that crazy. And there's a little bias baked into this, but, I mean, it's still a good choice nonetheless. But for my 3 guard, my third option, I got to go with my man Grant Hill. I got to go with Grant Hill at the small forward. I feel like he was one of those guys kind of like a Tracy McGrady, kind of like these players like Derrick Rose. Injuries aside, we just never know what they could have been. And it's all hypothetical. But when he was really in his prime, he was so dominant. He got drafted by Detroit, and he played on a Duke team that was kind of overshadowed by Christian Laettner and those guys and Bobby Lane. And it's like once he actually went and played on the Pistons and had that good run, he was just so dominant. He was just such an he kind of reminds me of like a he kind of reminds me, I mean, he's not nearly as like lengthy, but as far as his dominance, his ability to score, he was kind of like a Kevin Durant in a sense, where he didn't use his length, but his scoring ability, his ability to get to the rim was just so uncandid, man. I mean, he was just such a good player. And then you slowly seen the injuries kind of sneak up on him. And while he was effective, he was just never quite that good. So if anything, I'm just kind of paying homage to just a great player and watching some of those YouTube videos and seeing those seasons of how good he was. It's incredible. So, I mean, most top 100 lists you look at, you probably won't see Grant Hill, but since we're doing it kind of in position, I had to put him on there. And I mean, to back it, he was a 7-time NBA All-Star, All-NBA first team in 97, 4-time NBA second team, co-rookie of the year in 95, and made the all-rookie team, obviously. And, I mean, that was kind of like in such a small time frame, if you really think about it. He was an All-Star up until 2005, but he was an NBA All-Star from 95 to 98, 3 years running. He was just one of those better players in that time. And it's sad because you kind of see where he took like a little dip in his performance. And while he was still effective and good, it just wasn't quite the same. So 16 points for a career average, 48% from the field. So just to kind of look at some of his earlier years in Detroit, his rookie year, he averaged 19.9 points. So roughly 20, almost 2 steals, 5 assists, 6 rebounds, shot 48% from the field. Following year, about the same. He had 20 points, averaged over a half a block a game, over a steal a game, 7 assists. And believe it or not, at the 3-guard position, he almost averaged 10 rebounds a game. He averaged 9.8 rebounds. So, I mean, he's really a guy doing it all. Now that I actually kind of double-checked the, numbers, I didn't want to compare it to him, but, it's almost more of a Kawhi-esque, if you think about it. Minus the, his efficiency. He was mainly, like a pull-up 2 guy, efficient scorer. He's over a steal a game. So, I mean, that was just insane. I mean, you see he's doing it everywhere. He's scoring 20. He's over half a block, 1 steal, 7 assists, 10 rebounds. He's pretty much doing it all for the team. And kind of like his peak year in 1999, he actually averaged 26 points a game, 0.6 blocks, almost a steal and a half, 5 assists, and 6 rebounds. So, I mean, yeah, just a dominant, I made my case, obviously a dominant player. So I kind of had to go with Grant Hill, but also because I'm looking at it from more of a starting 5. You don't want to not include guys who are some of the greats, but I feel like if he was on the team with Isaiah Thomas and Joe Dumars, he would fit in very nicely with those guys. So I had to include him in there. But for my number 4,
wait, I got a quick question for you.
Sure.
What do you think? I know he suffered a lot of injuries. Did that happen after '99? Was that like early 2000s where his body started to break down a little bit and he went into like the second phase of his career? Or?
So it actually was right at 99, 2000. Like, so at that point, he was kind of, weaning off from the Pistons, and they actually traded him in 2000 to Orlando. But a part of what happened with that is on April 15th, 2000, right? 7 days before they started the playoffs, he sprained his left ankle in a playoff game, and he continued to play, and then it got worse, and he was forced to leave, right? And then eventually he broke his ankle in the Miami playoffs in the year 2000. So no coincidence, because that was tough, because that was right before Detroit traded him. So, I mean, you can imagine how that feels for a player. They probably lost faith in him. We see it all the time. So in Orlando, he was actually traded in 2000. And it's crazy to think, because in the year 2000, he averaged 25.8, so almost 26 points. In 2001, he averaged 13 the entire year, so that's almost like chopped in half. So, I mean,
if he didn't sprain that ankle,
my God.
I'm telling you, man, he was so good. But I feel like it's sad, because when you have a dominance at the earlier part of your year, and like, you're good, you're like a steady Eddie type player, right? It's recognized. But unless you do like a Derrick Rose and you're at the top of the East winning MVP, and don't get me wrong, obviously, I think Derrick Rose is better than Grant Hill. But I'm saying, just similarities of injuries and things. It's like you see someone so high and then they fall. Or like Grant Hill, he was just heating up, even though the numbers speak for themselves. And I think, man, I think he could have had a lot of success in Detroit or wherever he went. But the nice thing is he still was like a consistent player. Like I said, following season, he picked it up to 16 points. 2 years later, he got it up to 19. And from there, he just kind of played his role. In 2007, he went to Phoenix, and, he was just kind of a 13, 12-point game, a guy, 12 points per game type guy. So, I mean, obviously that was tough. And
so I got a question for you too. So you can be kind of a Detroit insider on this.
Sure.
Well, with Joe Dumars, so it's been documented that Jordan said that was his toughest defender. He has an MVP under his belt.
Yeah, 89.
He's been executive of the year for the Detroit Pistons.
Yeah.
And whenever they talk bad boys, and whenever you see highlight clips, even with the Jordan documentary, he doesn't seem to be included, even in the highlights. Like, you just don't see him.
You know what?
Do you know why he's not involved with Detroit culture? Because I feel like he's just the bigger part of what they did in the 80s as anybody on the team. And it just seems like when they talk bad boys, or when it's time to give Detroit Pistons their flowers, it's always Isaiah, John Sally, Bill Laimbeer, sprinkled with a little Mahorn or Rodman, but you never see Dumars. Is he just distancing himself from the NBA? Does he have friction with the Detroit Pistons franchise? I know this is a little off topic, but maybe
it's a good point. But, you know what, man? It's hard to say. As I kind of think about it, right? Like, I feel like there was such a narrative, like you said, of the bad boys culture, and Joe Dumars wasn't that. He was on the team. But, like, I think there's such a focus on the guys like Rick Mahorn, Bill Laimbeer, because they were so physically and just, like, verbally outspoken, like they were the dirty guys you had to go up against, and they were always causing the next ruckus. And they kind of took guys like Dennis Rodman under their wing. And who did you have at the forefront of all that? Isaiah Thomas. So I feel like Joe Dumars played his role. But I'm glad you said that about like the doc and what MJ said, because, even for myself, as I kind of looked at some of the accolades, I didn't realize he was all NBA defensive team 3 years, and that's just sheer dominance. I mean, because you're kind of locking in that like honor at your position, when you hold it down for that long. So, I mean, I don't really know why, like, I mean, it's weird because if you look at greatest players and stuff, you mentioned Joe Dumars, like, and that's in part due to his like impact on the actual organization, you know, because he was involved with the actual franchise after and gave back. And like, if you go to games, you know, Joe Dumars, especially being in Detroit, Michigan, you know, he gets all the love. He's a legend. But I think when you looked at Detroit around that time and their image and the bad boys, he just wasn't that. He wasn't the guy throwing the next punch, making the next dirty foul, or doing something like that. And I think for actually how outspoken he is, right? As far as his play, he doesn't say much, but you look at the numbers. You know, he's kind of like a Kawhi Leonard-esque, you know, like, oh, okay, like this guy's quietly dropping 30 on me. It's like, it speaks for itself, but I feel like when he was just on the court playing, I mean, he was known as a gentleman. He spent his 14 year with the Pistons, back-to-back titles. And like I said, the MVP. And I mean, to put the cherry on top, he was there as an exec when they won in 2004. Mm-hmm. So as far as like overall greatest Piston, like overall, I tip my hat to Joe Dumars, you know. But I think impact to the team, because that's the thing. Isaiah Thomas was somebody, right, who, you know, he caused a ruckus and he did all these things. But nonetheless, he was such an elite player at the same time. He was 3 All-NBA first team, you know, and he was on the cusp of being in that same tier as like Jordan, Larry Bird, and Magic. He wasn't quite there, but he was like on the cusp. And I feel like Joe Dumars, while he was very good, I think he was just overshadowed. Not because those guys were better than him, but when you had this image of like the bad boys, you had to think of, like you said, John Sally, Rick Mahorn, Bill Laimbeer, Dennis Rodman. And I think he just he just kind of got lost in the mix of it. Okay. And it's not right. I mean, I hope, you know, that most people who really just love looking back at old players and franchise, you know, this kind of motivates them to fire up some Joe Dumars, you know, highlights and things, because he was that great of a player. But I mean, think about it.
I mean, MVP, that speaks volume. So it's just odd to me that he's not celebrated more universally.
I agree.
I'm sure he's, you know, revered in Detroit, but it just seems, I mean, and obviously that's by choice not to speak much. I mean, obviously if he's just a quiet guy and he's to himself, but just seems like his name doesn't come up that often. I mean, you hear guys like Clyde Drexler and John Starks more than you hear a Joe Dumars, but
and I think that's one of those things, because like Clyde Drexler, right? Even in Houston, won back. I mean, because he was there, just for one championship, right? He didn't win back-to-back, or did he?
I know he was there for one. I can't remember if he was there for both.
Yeah, I want to say it was one. You'd have to fact check me on that, but anyway, I mean, Clyde Drexler, when he played on Portland, he was like the face of that franchise and still dominant when he went to Houston. And you look at John Stockton, it was like, I mean, I don't know about you guys. I can't name any other players on those Jazz teams other than Karl Malone and John Stockton. Like me personally, like they were the franchise. And I feel like, you know, kind of like I touched on, what I found out about a lot of people who don't really follow, I mean, know the Pistons and stuff. At their peak, they were back-to-back champions, and they were the bad boys. And when you think bad boys, you know, you think about all those guys aforementioned. And I think Joe Dumars, like, he was known as a gentleman. He was like a really nice guy. He actually, he was just kind of like low key. And while his play and like while his accolades and everything speak for themselves, I mean, he was a J. Walter Kennedy citizen. You know, he got the J. Walter Kennedy Citizenship Award in 1994. You know what I mean? Like he was just that kind of guy. I mean, he made his contributions off the court, on the court, and continued to, and you know, at an exec role and stuff. So, I mean, man, that's really good. I'd like to dig into it and see if I can find some sort of article or anything that kind of like, you know, speaks to that a little better. But I don't know. It's not right, but forever in my heart, he's always a number 2 Piston to me, because if you know Joe Dumars and especially his two-way ability at the guard position, it's hard to think the Pistons would have got those ships without him. He was, I mean, obviously, you know. So
here's a theory. Maybe because he's so quiet, maybe he doesn't really want the spotlight.
Yeah,
you know,
right.
Maybe there's a part of it. I mean, some introverted people, they, you know, once they finish playing, maybe they just want to not be shined, a spotlight on them so much. So perhaps.
That's very true. Very true.
Yeah. So, no, that's a great question, man. I'm glad you actually asked that because it is something when, you kind of take a step back and you're like, wait, what's going on here? But you just get so used to hearing Joe Dumars, Isaiah, you don't question it. But he definitely was kind of left out of the limelight. So, moving on to my fourth option. This was kind of tricky. I did separate my bias, but I feel kind of obligated here. This is very tough. And you got to forgive me because I'm kind of looking at the team that I'm building, right? And with that in mind, I had to go Dennis Rodman at 4. But while it may seem crazy, it was hard for me to pick him over Rasheed Wallace. I will say that. I know that seems a little bizarre, but when you talk about all-time Piston greats, right? And I just want to, quick talk about Rasheed for a second. Rasheed Wallace was acquired by the Pistons, like completely out of nowhere. I remember, quick backstory. Anybody who knows Rasheed when he played on Portland, he played with Scottie Pippen, and I think he played with Cliff Robinson too, didn't he?
He could have, if I'm not mistaken. I think it was really early.
Really early, yeah. Yeah, but I mean, Rasheed Wallace was like such a player that, I mean, he literally he was just so outspoken and just, I think he has the most technical fouls like ever in like a career of the NBA. So, I mean, that speaks for itself. But I mean, I felt like while he was so good, teams just never really gave him the right chance, right opportunity. He played his role that people knew how good he was. But I never forget, it was, let me make sure I got the right year here. In 2003, 2004. He was on Portland, right? And then he was traded to Atlanta, played one game, dropped 20 points, and then he was traded to Detroit. Yeah. And that's where his Detroit career reached.
I remember
that. But so basically Rasheed Wallace, he was instrumental. I mean, you had the Rasheed Wallace, Ben Wallace, it was a whole Wallace times 2 thing. And I mean, while it wasn't as like a prominent thing, he was kind of an earlier like stretch 4. He wasn't just a shooter, but he could really pull up from deep. His post game was incredible. He was a great defender. We all know the ball don't lie. The Pacers won't win Game 6. I could go on with all the quotables, but he was such a highly effective player, just on the court, his scoring ability, his defensive ability. And without that fifth piece, like that's what makes that legendary 04 Pistons team, which in my opinion is the greatest team to ever play, the greatest starting lineup the Pistons ever have, arguably in the NBA, if you look at just cohesiveness, unselfishness, they just played so well together. So it was special to see Sheed be kind of like brought into that, but how well he adapted and how much success he had. And for a guy like him who got close on Portland, it was good to see him get a championship too. And I mean, another thing, all 4 of those Pistons players, I think with the exception of Tayshaun, went to the All-Star game. They played on I think it was 07 when the Pistons, I think they went, I think it was, I think they had a 70-win year. Let's see.
I remember when there was the Pistons Lakers 04.
Oh yeah, yep.
And I wanted the Lakers to lose that so bad. I was the biggest Pistons fan for that NBA Finals.
That makes 2 of us. That was almost like the Sonics winning a championship to see the Lakers lose that championship. I had such a great summer. Summer was great. Oh,
it was great, man. And man, we were the underdogs, man. They didn't give us a chance. I remember it was like Pistons against the world. That's what it said on like the local newspaper. And Shaq even said in an interview, like I have so much respect for the Pistons because they were the only team to, not double team me. Like Ben Wallace, he held his own, played well. So, sorry, I didn't want to go off on a tangent, but I just want to pay my respects to Rasheed Wallace. He was a very effective player. I mean, and he knew his role. He averaged a solid, 13 points a game, 7 rebounds about while he played in Detroit. And I mean, just to get that contribution is really kind of like the fourth scorer, And some days he had to come up clutch and just be that guy to dominate. It was just incredible. And for you guys and anybody watching, favorite Rasheed moment when he stole the inbound. I forget who they were playing. He stole the inbound, chucked a half-court shot, and sent the game into overtime. I think it was in Nets. Don't quote me, but it's honestly one of the best basketball moments I've ever witnessed in live TV. So if you don't recall that, definitely look it up. But
he stole it from half court or from the back.
He stole the inbound. He stole the inbound. So he stole it on the other team's right side, and he just completely turned around and launched a half-court shot to send the game in overtime.
A full court shot at that point, right?
No. So it was at the
inbounding at half court.
Half court, yep, okay. At the half court marker. He stole it on the opposing side and just turned around. He launched it, and I think he banked it in, and they went into overtime. It was nuts, man. But I mean, that's just the type of guy.
I think he didn't. I feel like if he had a motor like Barkley, he's a surefire Hall of Famer. I think he's a guy who could score 27, but he'd probably give you 11. And it was just too many. And I love Rasheed, and he was extremely talented. I just feel like he underachieved for the ability he had. It just seemed like there was a lot of nights where he just left a lot of meat on the bone and just didn't care. I mean,
I agree.
He knew he was good, and he played when he wanted to. He didn't play when he didn't want to. And I still love him. I just always wanted more for him, and his motor was just so sometimey. But really good player, entertaining, and always gave you a great quote.
Always. And yeah, I mean, he was great team player, just great person, and I agree with that. I do think he was athletic, but he was almost more on like the, if you will, what's his name? I'm drawing a blank. Who's my man on the who played on the Grizzlies? Power forward. Zach. Yeah. Yep. Zach Randolph. I felt like he was more on the Zach Randolph side of the spectrum than he was like that of a Barkley. He was still athletic, but he wasn't as athletic. But I think what ultimately tipped him over the top was his competitive edge. When he didn't care and things weren't going his way, he just kind of said to heck with it, And that's who he was. But fortunately, he was able to get a nice championship in Detroit. So that was a beautiful thing to witness. So to kind of pick things back off, I mean, this guy, he really needs an introduction. While his success may have been most prominent, well, I wouldn't say that's for sure, but I mean, most people talk about it on the Bulls. Dennis Rodman, when he was drafted by the Pistons. And I mean, another guy, kind of like Rasheed, fits so well into that whole bad boy mantra, and they kind of took him under their wing. And I mean, he's arguably known as the best rebounder of all time. I mean, for good reason. And he was just such a dominant player. He was a pest. He was annoying. And I mean, he could rebound unlike any other. He was played the power forward position at 6'7", which is, I mean, like around an average height, but to average a total rebound on your career of 13, I just don't know what else you can ask from a guy. I mean, he had some unreal seasons while he played in Detroit. Even when he came in 86, 87, he was only rebounding about 4 rebounds a game, right? And then that jumped from 4 to 8. That jumped from 8 to 9, from that to almost 10, and then from 9 to 12, and then from that for the year, right? I mean, quick side note, I would love to have him in fantasy for this alone, but the following 2 years in 91, 92, and 92, 93 seasons, he averaged 18.7, 18.3, and the following year he averaged 17.3. So, I mean, obviously he figured it out, you know, and that's the dominant Dennis Rodman that we know and love. But, I mean, he was there for the Bad Boys championships. He was honestly just that piece that they were needing at that right time. He came in, you know, like I said, 86, 87 was his rookie year. And, I mean, there's no coincidence. That's right when they, you know, that's right when they won. And he was unselfish. He got rebounds. He fit that mantra. So, I just think as far as an overall dominant force and also being there to be a key contributor to Detroit's success, known as the Bad Boys getting the 2 championships, I got to tip my hat to him as a power forward. So, gosh, this was another tough one too, man. I mean, for my number 5 best in my center position, and funny enough, on one of these sites I looked at the center, it actually went this player number 4, and then the player I'm going to select at 5. And I had to just flip the order a little bit because, I mean, once again, personally, I just think it was the best player. And that is, if I had a soundbite, I would ring the Big Ben Tower, my man, Ben Wallace. Man, Ben Wallace, I mean, he's kind of like a Dennis Rodman in a sense of where, I mean, he got rebounds, right? But he was an undersized center. And, I mean, he was just so strong. He was a great defender. And, I mean, he was so elite in his ability to just block shots and just, I mean, you know, they didn't need to double. I mean, as I said before, Shaq said to himself, that was the only team that didn't need to double team me. And I'm sure Shaq felt it himself that, like, wow, this guy can really play. And Ben Wallace was a quiet but such a dominant force. And if you ask in our era, I don't know if there's a more iconic, kind of like Iverson, more iconic Detroit player than there is Ben Wallace. I mean, on the home games, he would have the fro out, fear the fro. He had his hair braided. On the away games, on the cover of NBA 2K5, can't forget about that. He actually owns the Grand Rapids Drive, the G League team. So he's still very active in like the local Michigan area. And I mean, he is just, I mean, all that aside, he's just such a great player. And it's special to see because kind of like a lot of these guys, Chauncey, Rip, Rasheed, Ben Wallace of that time, they all pretty much were on different teams. And then they all kind of eventually came to Detroit and played together, you know. So to see him just do all of that and just have the success they have was very special. But I want to get into some of these numbers of when he first got to Detroit real quick, and then I'll go back to the accolades. So first season on Detroit, he averaged 6 points, 2.3 blocks, and 13 rebounds. And then the following years, he averaged 3.5 blocks per game, 3.23, 2.4, and 2 during his whole tenure of playing on Detroit. So over like 2.5 blocks a game. And the crazy thing about that is he actually has a career average of 2 blocks a game in a total of, 16 seasons. You know, and that's just dominance. You know, when you say he was a specialist, he knew that one thing and he did it well. And kind of like Rodman, you know, that's what made him such a special piece because, he was just such an elite defender. He didn't need the ball, right? He didn't really need to score a bunch. He didn't need to be known as like the best player on the team. And I mean, the sweetest thing that we all have to just pay homage to, 3-time Defensive Player of the Year award. He won the award 3 times. And the funny thing when he won that, so he won the award in 2003, 2005, 2006, so back to back. And he was only on the All-NBA defensive team in 2004 and 2005 and 2006. So, I mean, just when he was at the peak of his dominance, I mean, he was just such an elite defender. I think he was one of the best I watched during that time. I mean, he could lock you up like no other. And don't get me wrong, he was no Rodman, but a very elite rebounder. But his shot blocking ability, I think is known right up there with only, you know, the finger wag himself, Dikembe Mutombo. So, I mean, I got to give it to him at 5, and that is my starting lineup. So I did cover this, so we'll make it easy. One of my honorable mentions of guys that I had to slide in there personally is Rasheed Wallace, you know, for reasons I've already mentioned. I just think he was such a great Piston, but he fulfilled a role in a time where there was no one guy. And just coming onto the team and his impact on the team, you know, his ability to score, defend, rebound, he was just such a great, solid force to have on that team. So, if anything, I definitely want Rasheed Wallace coming off of my bench. And then my 7th guy that I have to mention, who, I mean, easily would have been up there without Isaiah Thomas and Joe Dumars, and that is Dave Bing. So Dave Bing, you know, you probably are familiar with the name, but he played at an older time. He actually won Rookie of the Year in 1967, 7-time NBA All-Star. He was an NBA All-Star Game MVP in 76, 2-time All-Time NBA First Team, 1-time NBA Second Team. And, you know, he was just a prolific scorer at the point guard position. And he played at a time where they weren't really that good. So, I mean, that's kind of the thing. If you look at Detroit outside of when they were the bad boys and they won in 04, they really didn't have that much success, unfortunately. You know, they were another team competing for a playoff spot, but, you know, they were kind of capped as far as how good they could be. But he averaged a career total of 20 points. And like you said, Lawrence, I mean, he's doing this in 1966, 67. So that's about 25 points in today's game, you can imagine. Still has a career total of 6 assists a game. And I mean, gosh, he was just such a dominant player. His highest scoring year, he averaged 27 points a game with 6.5 assists, 5 rebounds, shot nearly 45% from the field. So he was a guy at a time when they weren't really that good, right? And they had key players, but he was like the best of all of those guys that he played with. You know, all NBA first team, 1 Rookie of the Year, and he could just light it up. So I definitely recommend, if you guys don't know Dave Bing, cue up a YouTube video, check him out. While it may be black and white, you can see him get buckets. So that is my 7. Sorry, that was a little long-winded. Did you guys have any feedback, questions, or anything about that?
No Chauncey, huh?
Man, I'm telling you, it's so hard because Mr. Big Shot himself, and Rip for that matter, I would have threw Tayshaun in there if I could. You really have to separate your biases from like the overall most dominant player. So, gosh, when you talk Joe Dumars and you talk Isaiah Thomas, Zeke, it's just hard to think of a world where you have a Rip and a Chauncey too. So, unfortunately not. But
yeah, I like it, but it is hard to leave off guys who I feel like are, you know, staples in the Detroit history basketball wise. Tayshaun, Dumars, Chauncey. I mean, whew, Chauncey was a big piece. I mean, he only got 1 championship, but I feel like he was such
huge.
That I mean,
he was huge. Finals MVP, I'm pretty sure, or was it Rip?
Yeah, he was a Finals MVP when they beat the Lakers. Yeah, but yeah, no, I mean, great list. Like I said, you can only have 7, so you got to figure out who's going to be on the outside.
Yeah, and that was tough. And kind of looking at it, so and another part to my logic, just looking at each player and their positions. So when I looked at it, Joe Dumars, for example, he played 14 seasons, and they were all on the Detroit Pistons. And then when, you know, you look at Isaiah Thomas, he had a long list, you know, a long tenure, obviously playing on Detroit. And while, you know, that doesn't discredit Chauncey, right? But, you know, he got in at an unbelievable time. But, I mean, he gave us a good 6 years, right? And I guess just looking at guys and kind of like you said, Joe Dumars winning the MVP at a later time, 2-time champion, same with IT. At the guard position, I didn't know where to slide him in. So, yeah, Now, don't tell any of my Michigan natives I did that.
You're always going to have somebody left out of any top 7 list. That's definitely the truth. But, yeah, that's a great team. I don't think anyone's going to be able to get to the rim. Allen Iverson would have a tough time against Rodman and Ben Wallace.
They did Jordan.
Yeah, no kidding.
That's an elite defensive squad for sure.
All right, so I know we're running a little bit long. You guys want to do the Warriors, or should we kick it to next week?
Go ahead. I'd rather you. I want to hear your team too.
All right.
You sat and listened to ours. We got to listen to yours.
Okay, so for the all-time top 7 of the Warriors, at center, you touched on him, but Wilt Chamberlain is the center for my all-time team, no question. The starters were relatively easy for me. Wilt played for the Warriors from 59 to 1965 when he got traded for peanuts. 6 All-Star. He made the All-Star team every year. He was the NBA MVP in his rookie season, which is pretty incredible. He didn't win the MVP the year that he averaged 50 points per game, which is also pretty incredible.
The opposite.
I don't understand how you can average 50 points a game and not win the MVP. Pretty crazy. In that season, he had 13 games over 60 points the year that he averaged 50 points per game. And he only had 2 games where he had under 30 points. 2 games. I think it were 82 games at that time or 80 games, somewhere between there. So that's just unprecedented. Will never happen again.
Silly.
Just if you look at Wilt Chamberlain's stats, like career for the Warriors, it's just incredible. The worst thing the Warriors did was when they moved to the Bay Area. I think that Wilt, being a Philly guy, and the Warriors moved from Philadelphia, that's where Wilt started, was in Philadelphia for the Warriors. I think he was upset being in the Bay Area, and he wanted to get back to Philly to be probably around, his friends and family and stuff. So I got to go with Wilt at center. The team was really good during his tenure. They never won a championship. They did lose in the finals to the Celtics when they had Bill Russell. So you can't go wrong with Wilt.
Absolutely.
Any comments on that one, or should I go into my power forward?
No, you're good. I mean, not to get too off topic, but do you feel
arguably Go ahead, Mark.
Oh, yeah, no, just basically, like, do you feel like, I mean, obviously he was oversized at that time, but do you see a world where, like, a modern-day Wilt would have been, I mean, obviously not 50 points a game, but would have been, like, a dominant center in, like, today's game? I mean, it just always makes me wonder. I mean, obviously they're just silly numbers, but it's like, you can't be a bad basketball player and be that elite, but at the same time, it's like, it just always makes me wonder,
I think he would be the best pure center in the NBA today.
Okay.
I don't think he would be as dominant as he was in his time today. Sure. I don't think there's any way he could average 50 points a game. No. I mean, they made a rule to make the lane bigger so that he couldn't just stand down there and just get buckets all the time. So I do think he would be way better than most of the centers in the NBA today. I mean, in my opinion, the best pure center in the NBA is Joel Embiid, and there's not many other guys who really play the position that are elite because of the stretch bigs, everybody shooting threes. So I think it would be really fun to have a guy like Wilt in today's NBA because he would give a team an ability to zag when everybody is zigging. Everyone is going to the stretch bigs, and if a team came out there and just had a dominant presence in the paint, like Shaq is another example, right? If Shaq came into the NBA today, how would that shape up? So,
I always wonder I mean, they emphasize how athletic he was, and he was a track star, and he did the long jump and high jump. I wonder if he was really just DeAndre Jordan trapped in the 60s and 70s. Like, I wonder if that's who he was, but he was just so far ahead of his time. He was so advanced physically that it just no one else was built like that at the time. So I'm always wondering if it was really that, because I mean, DeAndre Jordan is an elite athlete for his size, and he's very skilled. Obviously, he doesn't score like maybe Wilt could potentially score, but that athleticism is more common today than it was then. So I'm wondering if he was just DeAndre Jordan in the old days. We'll never know, but that's what always runs through my mind, because it's like, oh, he's athletic, but it's like, yeah, but you've never seen it, so of course it looks, ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, just something.
That's a good comparison.
Yeah. He did go up against Bill Russell in his, to defend Wilt a little bit. I feel like Bill Russell was a little bit of competition for him. Bill Russell, one of the all-time greats. But the league is definitely filled with way more athleticism today than it was back then. And also the 3-second rule didn't come around. I don't believe I'm mistaken. I believe they created the 3-second rule and made the paint a little bit bigger because of Wilt's dominance.
Yeah.
I think he is responsible for some of the rule changes that they made under the basket. But like you said, I mean, today everyone's athletic. I mean, for as athletic as LeBron is, he can't even just score every single time. I mean, it would definitely even out, and he wouldn't be as imposed. I think it would be easier for him to still be a dominant rebounder than it would be for him to be a dominant scorer.
Yeah. Definitely.
And on the rebounding, I mean, the guy did average like over 20 rebounds a game for 4 or 5 seasons with the Warriors. Just absurd stats. I think one season he was getting criticized for not passing, and the next season he just decided to try and get a lot of assists. I mean, he was an absolute legend. But I do agree he would not be as dominant in today's game. So moving on to my power forward, I'm going to go with everybody in my starting lineup is either a Hall of Famer or a future Hall of Famer. I think there's only one guy in my all-time top 7 who won't make the Hall of Fame, and that's a controversial pick I'll get to later. But this future Hall of Famer is Kevin Durant. He only played 3 seasons with the Dubs, but in those 208 regular season games, he averaged 25.8 points, 7.1 rebounds, 5.5 assists, almost a steal a game, 1.5 blocks a game, on 52% shooting from the field, 38% from 3, and 88% from the free throw line. So, and he won back-to-back NBA Finals MVPs. He went up against LeBron and took him down 2 times. He unfortunately, we all saw that he tore his Achilles in 2019, which was, tragic. Kind of almost, he was a much more elite player than Grant Hill, but I'm hoping that his career doesn't take as big of a turn as Grant Hill's did after that ankle injury that he suffered. That's what I was thinking of. It came to my mind when you were talking about that earlier. But Kevin Durant, even though he was only on the Warriors for 3 seasons, he's an all-timer. There is no power forward that you could put ahead of Kevin Durant. I actually think that he was extremely underrated as a defender when he played for the Warriors. He was an absolute force in the post. He could block. I mean, his length and his IQ on the basketball court is off the charts. His ability to get a shot off over anybody, it was unparalleled at the time before the Achilles. I'm really hoping that we see the same Kevin Durant or a really similar one in Brooklyn going forward into next year. So that's who I have at the 4. In the 17 playoffs, which was probably his most impressive playoff performance, the guy averaged 28.5 points, 8 rebounds, 4.5 assists, combined 2.5 steals and blocks, only 2.5 turnovers on 56% field goal shooting in the playoffs. 56 from the field, 44% from 3, and 89% from the free throw line. He did that in the entire 2017 playoffs. And I think that playoff run is one of the greatest all times. To average 44% from three, 56% from the field. Yeah, he had, talent around him that, helped him get easier looks. But I don't know if we'll see that again in the playoffs. It's an incredible efficiency.
Yeah, that's unheard of to be that efficient. And I mean, and even with you saying he averages 25.8 points, that was a, hey guys, I just want to fit in with the team 25.8 points. He could have easily averaged 32 to 35 points. I mean, for his career. And I think that's what holds him back from, because I know he's been quoted as saying, I'm tired of being number 2, but that's exactly why he can't overtake LeBron or be considered universally as the top player, because he just doesn't have the alpha gene. Like, he wants to be featured. He wants everyone to give him the respect, but he doesn't want to take it. He just wants you to give it to him. And yeah, while his game demands it, but sometimes you have to be like, okay, you guys, like, I'm going to take over, which he does, but it's just from the jump. Just come and establish dominance. You're the number 1 guy. You take as many shots as you want, do what you want. But he just kind of fits in and plays a role as a dominant guy. And it's just you think to yourself, man, if he just wanted to be an animal out there and just go for if he had James Harden eye for scoring, he'd obliterate so many scoring records. But I mean, there's no shame in just wanting to be, fit in with the team, because as a guy who loves to coach and a guy who, at some point, hopefully I have a son and I can teach him basketball, I would point to a guy like Kevin Durant, who's really good, but he's not trying to be above the team. So I really respect the way he's gone about his career. But man, if he was to step it up a notch or just put his foot on the gas a little more, it's crazy to imagine what his numbers could be.
Yeah.
Here's the theory I have. Good comparison, James Harden and Durant, is I think the reason why is I actually think Durant is really a sensitive guy. I think he's extremely in touch with his emotions, and he lets things get to him and like fester under the surface more than James Harden. I feel like James Harden's personality would be the opposite. He's probably, very thick-skinned, just like doesn't let things get to him. And I think that might be part of the reason why Durant has like struggled to be the alpha. Because I agree with you. I don't think his personality doesn't fit the alpha. And that's not a negative against his personality. It's actually a positive, because, he can be such a great team player by not being the alpha. So I totally agree with you. I think he's just really sensitive. Here, I want to get that into the
there you go. Oh man,
yeah, you guys have had some great years. And I'm a huge Steph Curry fan. I wasn't as much of a fan when they got Kevin Durant, because I just felt like it was way too much cheese on the cheeseburger. Like, it wasn't even fair anymore. So it made basketball a little not fun. But hey, for a guy who's a Warriors fan, I'm sure you were in heaven.
Actually, I obviously it was something I would never give back, and I really enjoyed it. But I agree with you. The 2015 run was my favorite run, and the 2016 run, except for the loss in the finals. But it was more fun to watch them grow from scratch than it was to get, the best player in the league, add him to the best team in the league. It became a little bit more known, even as a Warrior fan, because it's already known before you watch the game that they're going to win. It's not as exciting. So
yeah, that's true.
I had a guy at work who told me he's a big Warriors fan too, and he said the Warriors were such a doormat for so long. He enjoyed it being unfair for him for once. He said, for one, I just enjoyed the fact that no one could beat us, because I've taken so many years of everybody can beat us that now we're on the opposite end of the spectrum. And he said he enjoyed every bit of knowing that nobody had a chance. So I was like, that's fair. That's fair.
Yeah, and also one thing that I noticed growing up, I was around a lot of Laker fans, and they could never relate to me as a Warrior fan, and I could never relate to them as a Laker fan because it was polar opposite world. So I
Yeah.
think that what happened when the Lakers, struggled during the Warriors run, we can finally relate to one another. We can understand what each other is going through.
Yep. That's funny.
So moving on to my small forward, this is a Hall of Famer, Rick Barry is going to be my choice at small forward. Right after the Warriors traded away Wilt Chamberlain, they actually drafted Rick Barry in 1965 draft. He won Rookie of the Year. He was the 1967 All-Star MVP. Actually, all three of the guys I've mentioned so far, Durant, Wilt, and Rick Barry, at one point won a All-Star MVP, and two of them, Durant and Rick Barry, actually won a Finals MVP for the Warriors. Rick Barry was an All-Star in each of his 8 seasons with the Dubs. He was on 5 All-NBA first teams, 1 second team. He went to the ABA for 4 seasons after 2 years with the Warriors, which is really interesting to find that out. When I researched it, he moved to the Oakland team, and at the time, his quote was that they were giving him $50,000 a year, and it was just way too much money to pass up. But one interesting note is he actually got banned from playing basketball for a season. He actually got taken to court by the league because he basically forewent his contract in the NBA to go play in the ABA. So one season in the ABA, he just wasn't allowed to play. So he has 1 season missing, which is interesting. So one reason why Rick Barry definitely belongs on this list. First of all, my team is going to be the best shooting team out of these 3 teams, without a doubt. And Rick Barry is a definite reason for that. His free throw granny style is absolutely legendary. He was over 90% on his career free throw shooter. He helped bring the first championship to the Bay Area in 1975, which it was incredible. It was the only championship the Bay Area had in basketball until 2015. So that's a really long time. Rick Barry was the main reason why. They swept the Washington Bullets in that series. And in those playoffs, Rick Barry averaged 28.2 points, 6.1 assists, 2.9 steals. He was a really great defender. He was always really high up there in steals. They didn't even start counting steals as a stat until the very close to the end of his tenure with the Warriors. So I assume the guy would be all-time Warriors steal leader if they counted his stats throughout his career. In that series, he also shot 45% from the field and 90% from the free throw line. There wasn't a three-pointer during his time with the Warriors. There was no three-pointer. If there was, I think he'd be even a more dynamic player today. And you'll see that as I continue my team, you'll see that the shooting is not one of the weaknesses in the starting lineup. So I'll move on to my shooting guard here, and that's going to be Klay Thompson, future Hall of Famer Klay Thompson. Drafted in 2011 to form the Splash Brothers with Stephen Curry, who will be my point guard. Spoiler alert. So Thompson is an absolutely incredible player. I think he's one of the most underrated players in the NBA today. He is not an alpha similar to Kevin Durant, but he seems to be more comfortable with being the guy who doesn't get all of the credit. He fits alongside any point guard extremely well because of his ability to move off the ball. I don't know if there's a backcourt in the NBA that moves as well as these guys do off the ball. Klay Thompson once scored 37 points in an NBA quarter, and he did that on 13 of 13 shooting. I actually rewatched the third quarter during this like quarantine time here, and I had to show my girlfriend the amazing ability of Klay. He actually got an assist in that quarter, which I feel like is extremely underrated. So there was a play. He at the time has, I think, 28, 29 points. And who was it? A big man was open in the post. Carl Landry, was he on the team at the time, or Mo Spates? I don't remember who it was exactly, but somebody was wide open on the post. He threw it to him for an easy bucket. No questions asked. He wasn't going for his shot. The guy is just I could talk about Klay all day. I think he's my favorite Warrior. One other thing that I found, so Klay is an ultimate Iron Man. So in his until 2019, he played in 96% of regular season games and 99% of playoff games. He missed one playoff game out of like 120 something, and he only missed like 25 out of an absurd amount of regular season games. He just is an absolute Iron Man. When he tore his ACL in the 2019 NBA Finals, extremely tragic. He was taken to the locker room after he made his free throws, taken to the locker room, and I heard that he said to the trainers, his first question was, can I play on Sunday, which would have been the game 7. And that is incredible. He is an absolute
game.
What's that?
He wanted to come back into that game. He was walking back. He was walking from the tunnel back to the court, and the trainers had to say, "No, you can't go back into the game." And that's amazing. I think for him, I think he plays such a low collision style of play, has such a low collision style of play that it allows him to be an Iron Man, because all his game is predicated off of coming off of screens, pulling up immediately, or taking 1 to 2 dribbles, pulling up. Not often does he just go to the basket with reckless abandon, or does he take a lot of punishment and go to the free throw line like a James Harden does. His game is very clean to the point to where, after a game, he might not have taken too much punishment other than guys tugging on his jersey or trying to, wrestle with him not being able to get around screens. But Klay Klay's one of my favorite too. And I have family that went to Washington State, so I'm a little partial to Klay. So I actually like him in that sense. And anybody that'll give an interview with a Coors Light, which is probably my all-time favorite Klay moment, is hilarious. I actually think, even though he's not an alpha, I do, to the point you were making about Kevin Durant cares too much about what other people say, I think Klay doesn't. I think he has that I don't give a F gene. And so there's so many times where he's bailed those guys out where it looks like it's doom and gloom, the game's over, and he's like, no, it's not. Give me the ball. And he hits about 3 or 4 threes, and now they're back in the game, and he's scorching hot. And he's the guy. I mean, he was the guy who won him that Grizzlies series. I mean, if he didn't get hot, they were going home against the Grizzlies, I think, in 2015, or it might have been 16. I can't remember, the one where they eventually lost. I think that was the one where they lost in the finals to Cleveland. I think it was the 73 win. No, before that. No, it was their first championship, because they were
15. Yeah,
it was 15. They were down 2-1. Tony Allen got hurt. It kind of changed the complexion of the series. But that game that they almost lost, the actual win was because of Klay, and that's what got them rolling. So can't argue with Klay. Great player, hilarious guy. He kind of fits the Bay. Very easygoing, laid back. Doesn't get riled up about too much, but he's always ready to to take a shot.
And an absolute elite defender. His ability to I think he learned a lot from Andre Iguodala. I think he was a big influence on him, and Klay has just turned into an absolute elite defender. I don't know if I don't think he's made an All-NBA defensive team, but he should.
Yeah, he should have made a couple. His defensive prowess is really underrated. And a lot of people don't know about Washington State, so they don't know what his background is. But Washington State was a defensive-minded team. They had Dick Bennett, who coached at Wisconsin and was famous for his defensive teams. And they were like, when he was at Washington State, they were trying to hold teams in the 40s and 50s, which is extremely tough to do. I mean, even more so now that the shot clock has gone down in college. But those Washington State teams were defensive teams, and he was the defensive stopper on that team. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people just don't know the history of Washington State, but he came into the league as a seasoned defender.
So that's Klay Thompson. By the way, also another cool story is he got interviewed in New York City by just the random news people, not knowing that it was Klay Thompson, and they gave an interview about scaffolding in New York City. And he also likes to read newspapers as like physical newspapers before each game as a way of relaxing. Yep. I could talk about Klay all day. After they win their next championship, if Klay, if you're listening, I would love to go on your yacht with your friends. You know, let's celebrate.
Nobody celebrates in the offseason like Klay Thompson. He is an elite offseason celebrator.
So to go with to finish out my starting five, I got a future Hall of Famer, best shooter to ever play the game so far, and that's Steph Curry. He once averaged in that 2016 season, the 73-win team, he averaged over 5 3-pointers made per game, and he shot it at a 43% clip that season. So he was shooting an absurd amount of threes and doing it with extreme efficiency. He's a 2-time NBA MVP. He, in his career, he's got averages of 23.5 points, 4.5 rebounds, 6.5 assists, just under 2 steals, 3 turnovers. That's on his career, is 47% from the field, 43% from 3, and 90% from the free throw line. That is an insanely efficient guy. I think in 2016, I was mistaken. I actually think he shot the 3 over 45% from 3. He was the first guy, I think, to eclipse the 50-45-90 club. So he averaged 50% from the field, 45% from 3, and 90% from the free throw line. And that was when he was the unanimous MVP, second MVP run. The guy is just an absolute gunner. I've never seen anyone shoot the 3 like he did and will continue to do when the league starts back up or next season. He was so incredible that before games in 2016, 2017, fans of opposing arenas would show up to the stadium 2 hours early to watch a guy warm up. He is the reason why you'll see Warrior fans around the world. There were people wearing Warrior fans in every country now, just like, you know, there's always been Kobe jerseys around the world. Now there's a little sprinkle of Steph Curry jerseys out there as well, and Kevin Durant Warrior jerseys. And I think it all started from Steph Curry's dominance. And like you said, Lawrence, earlier about Allen Iverson, probably one of the reasons why he was so popular is because he's not a very tall guy. He kind of looks like most people, like your ordinary guy. So that's hands down my point guard. That's my starting 5. I would shoot every team.
Yes.
They would just shoot lights out.
But your backcourt alone is like that. And for Steph Curry, I mean, I have a list of guys. I mean, and I won't get into it, but of guys who are the most entertaining to watch when they're hot. And I don't think I've ever seen a guy in the NBA who is more entertaining when he's on fire than Steph Curry. And when you watch it, my nickname for him is Cheat Code Curry, because when he gets on fire, it's a cheat code. I mean, he's pulling up from 35 feet with ease, and it's not hitting any rim. And it's ridiculous how quick he can go from having 4 points. And you're like, what just happened? And it's not just threes. It's like getting in the lane, floaters, underhand floaters, overhand floaters. His layup package is crazy for a guy who's seemingly unathletic. I mean, he, like you said, he looks like an ordinary. Look like he could work at Best Buy. Like he doesn't look like an NBA quote unquote guard. But when you play against him, he's putting up NBA elite guard numbers. And yeah, I mean, he's revolutionized the game. He's made shooting cool. Guys used to want to dunk in warmups. Now you see guys that want to shoot from almost half court in warmups. So it just shows you the magnitude and the effect he's had on the game, not only in the NBA, but globally. I mean, I think now shooting is at such a premium. And a lot of that is because of him. He's made it to where, I mean, he's completely changed the landscape of defense, because now you're stretched so far out and you have to be worried about a guy so far from the basket that it just stretches you too thin to be able to recover at any space. Like you said about Klay, I can go on about Steph Curry because he's like one of my all-time favorites, and it's amazing to see the effect he's had on his teams, the NBA, and just the perception of basketball in general.
Yeah.
Here's a quick story. So there was one regular season game back in 2016, 2017 that I will always remember. It was against Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook when they were on the Thunder that season. Regular season, it was the game in which it was really, I think the Warriors were behind by a decent amount. They start coming back. Steph Curry I think it was a 37-foot three-pointer to tie the game and send it into overtime. And then the Warriors ended up winning the game in overtime. That night, I did not have any plans after the game, and everyone that I was watching the game with had plans to go to a concert. I was so amped from watching that game that I snuck into the concert. I paid a bouncer to let me in because it was sold out. Because I couldn't have the night end.
Yeah,
it was just too exciting.
Was that the Saturday night game where Mike Breen said "bang" like 3 or 4 times, like he was excited? Yeah, that's a crazy shot. Yeah. Like, oh my God, I couldn't believe he made that considering the circumstances, the time of the game. And I've watched him so much, I knew he was going to shoot it. I can tell his gait by the way he's galloping up the court. I can tell when he's thinking about pulling. And I was like, he's going to shoot this. But I didn't know he was going to pull from that far out. Yeah, no, that game was nuts. Like one of the all-time classic regular season games.
Mm-hmm.
So that rounds out the starting 5. For my 6th man off the bench, he's also a Hall of Famer. It's going to be Chris Mullin.
There you go.
He spent 13 seasons with the Warriors, part of Run TMC back in the day with Don Nelson. He was with the team from 85 to 97, and then he had a little comeback to get his jersey retired. So in 807 games, he averaged 20 points, 4.5 rebounds, 4 assists, 1.5 steals, a half a block, 2.5 turnovers on 51% shooting from the field, 36% from 3, 86% from the free throw line. He was a fantastic all-around scorer. I think he would be a great spark plug off the bench. He, like I said, he was part of Run TMC with Tim Hardaway and Mitch Richmond. And there were 5. So when Mullin was on the Warriors, he had 5 consecutive seasons where he averaged over 25 points per game. And in each of those seasons, he was shooting over 50% from the field. So just an incredibly efficient shooter. The Warriors back then were, running and gunning. That team would actually, fit quite well in today's NBA. Don Nelson was ahead of his time for sure. He, in 5 playoff seasons, he put up averages. I thought this was impressive. He actually averaged 38.5 minutes per game in his playoff career with the Warriors, averaging 21 points, 4.5 rebounds, 3 assists, over a block and a steal a game, on 52% shooting. And he was a 47% 3-point shooter in his playoff career. So he was a guy who was not afraid of the moment, and he would just, if one guy in my starting lineup, let's say Rick Barry or Clay, was having an off shooting night, or even Steph, I could bring Molly off the bench and just continue to fire away from distance. So Chris Mullin definitely deserves to be on the all-time starting 7. I was kind of sad that I wasn't able to put him in the starting 5. And so that gets to my 7th pick, which is definitely going to be controversial. I don't know how this will go. It's definitely not as bad as not picking Dennis Rodman on the Bulls, but that's going to be sorry, Lyle, but that'll be Baron Davis was my 7th guy. So yeah, the reason why Baron makes the list. He was never an all-star in his time with the Warriors. He was in a finals MVP. They never made the finals. He didn't make an all-NBA team during his time with the Warriors. But his impact in the Bay Area was felt more than any other team until 2015. Run TMC had a nice little run. But the 2007 We Believe Warrior team, that team was run by Baron Davis. The guy was absolutely electric with the ball in his hands. His ability to get to the rim whenever he wanted was incredible. And he was actually a really decent shooter. Definitely not great, not elite, but enough to make the defense think about his shot. Let me see here. In 11 games of the 2006-2007 playoffs, and that's where the Warriors made a midseason trade to get Steven Jackson, Al Harrington into the fold, and traded away Troy Murphy and Mike Dunleavy. And the team just went on an insane run towards the end of the season. The chemistry was incredible between all the guys. They also had Jason Richardson at the time. So in the 06-07 playoffs, Baron averaged an absurd 40.5 minutes per game, and he shot 51% from the field, 37% from 3, which was far above his career mark of 32%, 77% from the free throw line, and he scored 25.3 points per game, 4.5 rebounds, 6.5 assists, almost 3 steals, 2.9 steals per game, a half a block, and just under 3 turnovers per game. And he also had the most ferocious dunk I have ever seen in any NBA game. The dunk over Andre Karolinko. They might not have won the series, but they won the moment of that series.
I haven't heard from Karolinko since that dunk.
Yeah, it was pretty much like the end of his career in a way.
R.I.P. Andre Karolinko. It was over at that moment. Oh my God.
And I've never heard a stadium get louder. I've never heard the team, his teammates were in awe of the dunk. It was an absolutely incredible dunk. So even though he doesn't have the accolades of the other players, Mitch Richmond, Tim Hardaway, Draymond Green, Latrell. I'm missing the big man who came right after Wilt. Oh man, there were a few other guys who you could say were up there. Nate Thurmond. Nate Thurmond was another guy who I left off the list. And I just think that Baron Davis also, not just with the historic run he had and the influence he had on the Bay Area during his time playing for the Warriors, it also, I think he would fit the team dynamic that I put together. It would be nice to get a guy who would, focus a little bit more on his athleticism and his ability to drive to the rim. Although some other guys on my team could do it, I think Baron would be the best of them, of the guards, to be able to get to the rim and have some athleticism there in my squad. So Barron runs out the top 7.
That's solid.
You know, Draymond was a notable exception for me. I thought about, you know, would I put Draymond in there for chemistry? But then at the same time, I got Kevin Durant in the starting lineup, so maybe the chemistry off the court would not be as good as you'd think, and it would be better to have Barron in there. So I went with Barron. What's that?
No Webber. No Chris Webber.
Oh,
yeah, you know, Chris Webber, he was good, but I kind of focused on teams that had success. Mm-hmm. It was kind of one of the criterias I went by. Every guy who was on my team brought the Warriors to the playoffs, were a big reason why they got there. And they also performed well in the postseason. So Chris Webber, I don't even know, he wouldn't even be in the next couple that I would have. I think I would put Draymond and Thurmond above Chris. Yeah.
Okay. Team success over ability, that's fair. I mean, individually, he's undeniable. But, I mean, if you're going with guys who played on teams who had a winning culture, that's definitely fair. And Baron Davis, I mean, I wonder how serious he took his, like, conditioning and body maintenance, because he just broke down so many times. But Don Nelson unlocked his game in a way that nobody else did. And I think it was just so wide open and just run and gun that just, I mean, I'm sure he played like that in summertime in pickup runs and Drew League and at UCLA at the runs that are so legendary, and anywhere else he played, that it just probably felt like playing back at home. But that was an entertaining time to watch him play. He's one of my personal favorites. I mean, I liked him all the way back to when he was at UCLA. So, yeah, no, I can't argue with that. If nothing else, you guys are must-see TV, and teams better get a hand up.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, any other comments? I know we've gone pretty late. You guys think we did a pretty good job on these top 7s?
I think so.
Yeah, I think so. I more so was leaning on you guys. I was like, I hope they think this list is solid. I mean, they're all Hall of Famers, and all of their jerseys are in the rafters with Philly. So I definitely tried to crunch the numbers and put together a team that seems somewhat cohesive. And I could have picked the Sonics. I mean, now that you guys went with your home teams, now I wish I would have just went with Sonics. But I just tried to go with somebody that just, I don't know why Philly came to mind. I really don't have a reason. I was like, oh, I'll do Philly. But you guys had great teams. I think for Mark's team, I would have squeezed Dennis Rodman in there and maybe Joe Dumars. But that list is still great. Somebody's not going to make it. So
yeah, Dennis Rodman and Joe Dumars were in there.
Oh, they were.
Yeah, they were.
Yeah, it was Isaiah Thomas.
You didn't put Rasheed. You were saying Rasheed Wallace wasn't in because of
yeah.
Okay.
So it went.
Yeah.
Isaiah, Joe Dumars, Grant Hill, Dennis Rodman, Ben Wallace, and then Rasheed honorable mention.
Gotcha. Okay.
And then Dave Bing. But in retrospect, I would trade probably Chauncey.
Yeah.
Rasheed. That was
Yeah, but you guys had
Chauncey for Dave Bing or Chauncey for Rasheed?
Probably Rasheed, just because Dave Bing, you got to give him his credit for his time. You know, like he was dominant in that era. So he is a Detroit great. But Rasheed, he's kind of in the mix with, like, he stacks up against Rip and those other guys when being compared because they all kind of played together. So I got to give it to Chauncey. Well, yeah, he's coming off the bench. Yeah, I'll probably give it to Chauncey. But
nice. Yeah, that Warriors squad is ridiculous. I mean, Wilt Chamberlain and Kevin Durant in your front court. You got the greatest shooting back. It's just scoring everywhere. I don't know how great they are on the defensive end. They're not bad at all, but if you're not scoring 120 points, you're going to lose anyway. So who cares about defense when the ball is being taken out of bounds every time?
Mm-hmm. And, one interesting thing is the Warriors team got a lot better since 2010, right? If I was doing the all-time Warriors team prior to the most recent run, I'm short 3 guys, and they're all on the starting lineup.
Yeah. Yeah, the Warriors have a lot of notable, considering their history. I mean, outside of most recent history with them winning championships, they've had a lot of great players come through there that, even without a lot of great winning seasons, they've still had a lot of entertaining, high-quality basketball players.
Definitely. Good picks. Great picks.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that does it for another edition of Fantasy NBA Tonight. We'll be back next Wednesday. We're going to do the second episode of our expansion draft. So we'll be continuing that every Wednesday, and then we'll do another all-time top 7 next Thursday. So we'll see you guys next week.
All right. Later, guys.
All right. It was a pleasure, guys.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.